Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
So I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about season 5, episode 16, Dr. Bashir. Dr. Bashir, I presume. Wow, can't talk much. Uh, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and X as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely. You can find us and follow us. All those places where you do your social media. And of course, Facebook probably being the most dominant one right now for us. And anywhere that you ever listen to podcasts, I do it on Spotify. I like to check in, make sure our dulcet tones aren't blowing at anybody's car speakers. Tonight we are talking about Dr. Bashir and this nice little bottle episode. We kind of get back to the bottle episode motif here with Deep Space Nine after everything that we've just seen, giving us some, real kick from the Dominion. Now we're kind of trading off, going back into Starfleet here. But before we do any of that, David, how was your week?
It's been good. So last week I was not here. I was at a men's retreat from church, and that was fun. Got to hang out with the guys and enjoy spending time with them. I was last weekend. Finished reading Catch 22, which you said you'd read it, and man,
Hmm.
rereading it, it's really good. I mean, it's a dark comedy, but man, it's a really good dark comedy for what it is. I started watching the Hulu show version, which has George Clooney in it. Um,
Okay.
it's a 6 episode version, and unfortunately, it's not nearly as good as the book because the book really specializes in absurdist humor. The whole point, just for a summary for everyone, is the catch 22 is that only insane people would keep flying planes into Nazi Germany and being shot at, but only sane people are allowed to fly planes. But if you're insane and you fly planes, then you're supposed to be allowed let out of the military. But anyone who claims that I don't want to fly these missions is obviously sane, and therefore he's allowed to fly missions. So it's the catch 22 is you can't get out, and it's a great absurdist humor book. It's about the horrors of war. I mean, the some of the climactic scenes at the end of the book are like it strips away the humor and goes straight into just horrors of war, how terrible life is, and um, pulls away the curtain for a bit. And the show, unfortunately, is just they can't. They're trying too hard to like draw out the story, and so they lose the absurdist humor, which is interesting because George Clooney likes playing absurdist characters. He likes being in comedies and playing up the absurdist angle. And the character he plays is only in the book for a short time, so he's only in the show in the first episode so far. And he is an absurdist character, but the rest of the show is really fails to hit that appropriately,
Okay.
which is unfortunate because the book is really good. I haven't seen the original movie, but I have been watching clips on YouTube, and it definitely seems like the original film definitely got that absurdist humor correct. So I do plan on watching the original film at some point. But yeah, Catch 22. If you want to read a dark humor, a book about some dark humor in World War II, boom. I also read Slaughterhouse 5, which is kind of a similar, it's absurdist humor set in World War II. Instead of it being about the guys doing the bombing, it's about there's a guy, one of the main characters, who experiences some of the aftermath of that bombing, the Dresden bombings to be specific. The bombing of Dresden, which killed like 140,000 people in one night. So he was there. The character is there for that and experiences some of it, but it's also got an absurdist humor angle, but it's much shorter than Catch 22. So I read that real quickly. Um, so yeah, that's been me. How about you?
Well, I kind of got caught up into the anti-Halo campaign this week. So, um, as a lot of you are aware, Paramount has, greenlit and subsequently been producing a show called Halo, which is supposedly based off of the video game of the same name, released what? 20 years ago, something like that. Very popular game. I'm sure there's plenty of people who've played it. You've read the various books, the comic books. There's just all kinds of stuff out about the game, and the game actually continues. From what I understand, there is going to be yet another video game in the Halo franchise relatively soon. So there's a lot of lore to base a live action show off of. I did start watching the first season. I did not make it through the first season because, in my opinion, it was, well, terrible. It was awful. It was not Halo. I mean, they could have called that anything else. They could have done any other sci-fi show and been fine. But the fact that they were calling it Halo and using certain character names and whatever else to pass off that garbage to us was an insult to say the least.
Right.
And but of course they just plodded along, and it's already releasing actually the first episode of season 2 I think aired, yeah, either yesterday or the day before. And
Hmm.
the reason I got this whole campaign about it was because there was all these articles out about how groundbreaking the show was and how wonderful the season is. And if you love season 2, well, hold on to your pants, because or if you love season 1, season 2 is gonna knock your socks off. All this stuff, right? And then there was an article that came out in particular that really caught my attention, that really got me into this, and it was article was titled, "You don't have to be a Halo fan to enjoy Halo." And so I read the article, and really it could have been summarized as basically saying, please don't be a Halo fan. Then you can enjoy Halo. Because if you know anything about the game whatsoever, if you've paid any attention to it at all, that is an insult to everything that you know about that franchise. And I'm just absolutely not going to try to pander to it at all. I like to try to sometimes like find certain aspects of the show that of any show that you can like. And I mean, there's a lot of shows out there that people have told me before have been absolutely terrible, and I have watched them. And while I can see why they wouldn't like it. Again, I have found things that can be redeemable about the show. I can't in this one. I absolutely can't. They have
Right.
totally destroyed the storyline. It's not even like loosely based. They just, like, again, they took certain names of certain things and stuck them in while they wrote their own narrative. And if they had just wanted to do a sci-fi show, that would have been perfectly fine. But the fact is they keep trying to jam down our throats this whole thing about how it's Halo, it's this game, that's the Master Chief. That it's not. It's absolutely not. And I refuse to accept it at all. And so I got into this whole campaign about how this is not Halo. Call it anything else, but don't call it Halo. And
Hmm.
yeah, I spent a whole lot of time on that. Way more than, yeah, I should have, to be honest. But you know me. Sometimes I get hyper fixated on things, and this became my thing this past weekend, or yeah, this past week. I just don't understand why they would do it. It's trash. I'm not even. I never finished the first season. I have no intention of finishing the first season, and I'm certainly not even going to pander into the whole. Well, let's see what they do on the second season and give it a shot. No, I'm not going to do it. You
Right.
know. I have let my love of other things carry me forward on other shows that were seemingly garbage to get to that next part. Like, for example, Star Trek Picard. The first season of that show was arguably the worst season. And the only thing that kept me going was my love of Trek overall. My love of Halo is not working here. It's the other way around. It's like I love what came before so much. I'm not going to keep watching this.
Bastardization.
Right. It's not even that. It's a completely different thing. I mean, I would almost be halfway accepting of a bastardization of the Halo lore and everything else, but this is not that. And it goes far beyond, because there's some things that people pointed out as like major critiques of the show, or like there is some gender swapping and there's some race swapping and there's some those things don't bother me. They've never bothered me in any of the shows that I've ever watched. That's never been a problem for me. If the character comes across well, whatever it is, I'm fine with it. Heck, a lot of times I wouldn't even know there was a problem until someone pointed it out to me or whatever.
Right.
But again, those things are not issues for me. It is simply that it is in no way based off of any of the lore that was established beforehand. That's like someone saying they're going to do a Lord of the Rings movie, and while they named their characters Gandalf and Bilbo and Frodo, they, I don't know, made the movie about capitalism and how they had offices on Wall Street. That's the same thing. That's how I would equate this. So that's what you're watching.
Mm.
Oh, it's Lord of the Rings, but he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And he's got a high-rise apartment in Manhattan. That's not Lord of the Rings. Not. Yes,
Yeah.
it's Frodo, but that's not Lord of the Rings. Okay,
Right.
that's what I'm saying. That's what this would be the equivalent of
Mm.
them. So I'm not intending on watching it, and I'm not going to let anybody sit there and try to tell me, "Oh, this is a great show." It's a great show if you know absolutely nothing about Halo. So yes, if you know nothing about Halo, go watch it, go enjoy it. But for all the rest of us fans who played the games, who read the books, who did the comic books, who did all what, you're never going to enjoy that show. Never. And they're not making it for you. So go find something else to watch.
Right.
There. I just
Yeah.
saved you, let's see, 10 episodes. So I've just saved you 10 hours.
20
To
hours of your life.
20, really. Yeah. Don't watch season one either. I
Yeah.
just saved you. And whatever number of seasons they end up doing on that garbage, I just saved you your time. Don't waste your time. Other than that, the week's gone well. um, things have been pretty good.
All moved
Um,
in, 100%,
we
feeling
are
at
we
home.
are moved in, not quite, because there's still a lot of things that need to be moved around. And as you can kind of sort of see in here, I haven't done any decorating, hanging up of things and pictures and whatever else. I haven't done any of
Right.
that yet. I unfortunately did have to take a break from workouts and everything, but part of that was because of the move. Part of it was because I really hurt myself,
Oh,
and I actually have an appointment coming up to see if I may have a hernia, which if I do, I will have to have that surgically repaired. So hopefully I
I had
don't.
a hernia once. I know what you're feeling.
Oh,
And I'm wondering if I might have pulled my stitches, if you will, or what the
yeah,
fix was. It was 10 years ago I had it done, but I was playing volleyball last weekend. And I'm like, think
yeah.
things aren't in the same place they were.
Yeah.
So,
So with me wanting to do the strongman competitions and the workouts and everything else, it's very important that I get this evaluated. Now, the crazy thing is, like, there's an equal, in my opinion, there's an equal chance that it was just that I was overworking myself. I was obviously still working my job. I was doing workouts. We were moving. There was a lot of stuff going on. I had very little downtime for rest. And if you are into any kind of physical athleticism, whatever, rest is very, very important. And I had significantly less of that than I should have. And
right,
I think that it just kind of led to some like severe muscle strain,
right,
because once I became aware of the potential of the problem, I just stopped doing everything else. I really just focused on just doing my job and taking care of my kid, of course. But then there was no lifting, there was nothing. Thankfully, all the stuff for the move was finished, but then I just stopped doing everything else and really just focused on like light stretching, cardio, easy cardio, and like walking around and everything else. And the pain did lessen significantly. Um, and now it's been about a week or so. I still get some twinges here and there, but it's not nearly as significant as it was in those first few days when I noticed. But it's still a good idea, especially considering what I want to do, to go and get checked out. So that's why I'm going to the doctor. My appointment is Thursday, I think, and getting that looked at, and hopefully it isn't anything serious.
right.
But yeah, so that's kind of been how I've spent my week, and hopefully when we come back next week, I'll be able to say, "Hey, things are fine." Um, in other news, before we jump into our episode, do want to say special shout out to our contest winner, Vincent, who we successfully completed the delivery of his gift just this last
Yay.
week. So
Great.
he got it. I got the notification about the delivery, the successful delivery, and all that kind of stuff. I was hoping he would have popped up in here by now, but hey, we got time. So, but again, congratulations being the first winner of any of our contests. And we'll have more to come later on down the road. Not sure when, but we will. Um, I do also want to address the lateness in which the last episode came out. We ran into some technical difficulties on our hosting site for all the podcast episodes. So, in fact, not only was I not able to post the episode, but if you went looking for our show on certain platforms, you wouldn't have been able to find it for like 48 hours. It was
Oh,
like everything was gone. And
oh.
don't worry, there was ample panic on my side. Don't worry. But
You've done all the
I got it.
parenting and
Yes,
done.
I got it fixed. I got it fixed. So there was a slight delay, but I got it fixed, and that means
Great.
unfortunately there will be a delay in the release of our first contact episode because everything was scheduled. So because everything basically went poof.
Mm,
Putting everything back has been kind of slow going.
right.
The show is there entirely, but all the new stuff that I had saved for time release and everything else that was gone. Not a big
God.
deal. I've got all the stuff, so it's just kind of re-uploading whatever. But it is going to take a little bit of time. So yeah, there's going to be about a week delay on that. Actually, no, it'll be a 2 day delay. So it'll come out tomorrow. For those of you who are live, you'll get it tomorrow. Anybody else, you'll get it like within like Monday. So there
Gotcha.
you go. Um, After that, and after this episode, of course, we have to do our After Dark for The Expanse, the fifth book in the Expanse series. We will finally be ready for that. So if you are interested at all in following along, and if you have been following along, just know that's coming up in the next week. Um, or no, it'll be the week after this. That's what that is. Yeah, because the delay. Anyway, it's coming. That's what you should know. It's coming.
Right.
You've got some time to finish if you haven't finished reading it yet. You've got some time. If you want to get caught up fairly quickly, I know it's available in audiobook form on a lot of platforms. I know Spotify has it, Amazon Books has it. And I think the Apple Store has it as well. Not 100% on that one, but my brother-in-law has been listening to the audiobooks, and apparently you can consume them fairly quickly when you do the audiobook format.
I bet.
He's, yeah, he told me he was like 9 or 10 chapters in before he realized he was that far along.
Mhm.
So they go pretty quick. So
Yeah.
you can still get caught up and be
You
with
better
us when
not
we
beat us to
do.
the end.
Yeah, well, no, just stay with us book by book. Don't go
Yeah.
to the whatever. Just stay with us book by book. We're
Yeah.
we're clipping along pretty quickly on our own.
Yep.
But we're not here to talk about all of those things. I mean, I guess we are, but later. We are here to talk about Dr. Bashir tonight.
Mhm.
So, David, would you like to give us the cliff notes
I can
before
do
we
it.
dive in? All right.
Perfect. All right, guys. So again, this is Dr. Bashir, I presume, seeing as how I can say that correctly this time. All right. So this episode is we're on Deep Space Nine, obviously, and the hologram engineer Louis Zimmerman, who most people will recognize as the uh, holographic program on the Voyager show, which I haven't watched. So I'm like,
Well, don't
this is
worry. We're gonna get to him tonight. So just
right.
stick with
Exactly.
Dr. Zimmerman, and we'll get to the rest.
Exactly, exactly. So he is on the station because he is creating a new version of his holographic medical program that'll be like an improved version on the one that already exists. He was the template for the version that was installed on the Voyager ship, and so that's why the actor plays that character on that show. But Dr. Bashir has been chosen to become the new template for a new version, which will be a longer lasting version, something that's meant to be, you know, up and running for a longer period of time than the original version. Um, so this, of course, is a great boon to Julian's career. It's a kind of feather in his cap, as you might say. And of course, part of the process includes getting to know Julian very deeply. So he gets interviewed by Zimmerman about his history. What did you eat when you were 5 years old, and 10 years old, and 15, and 20, and 25, and compare and contrast your meals from those ages. So crazy, intimate questions like that. Um, but Julian makes a point of saying, please do not contact my parents for any reason. That's my one request. So what does Zimmerman do? He of course invites his parents to the station, to his chagrin. Um, Long story short, we're going to just quickly move on. The reason he doesn't like his parents and is kind of estranged from them is because it turns out when he was 6 years old, Dr. Bashir was taken by his parents to get genetically modified going from a child who was struggling in school to someone who was now excelling in school. And in addition to getting some improvements to like hand-eye coordination and his mental capacity, that meant that he was now kind of an illegal member of society. If the Federation found out, they would basically force him out of Starfleet because they don't want genetically modified people in Starfleet. Um, he is, furious with his parents for showing up, furious with Zimmerman for asking his parents there. He didn't want this secret to get out, and he is not on good terms with his parents. They come off as nice people at first, but we come to understand that the real conflict is between Julian and his father. His father is one of those never can hold a job types who goes from this plan to that plan, always telling about what his great next project is, but it turns out it's always just never coming to fruition. And so Julian here is successful as a doctor on a foreign space station, and his father is this kind of un not unpleasant, but just not. We can see why Julian might have had a troubled childhood, is what I'm getting at. But when they get into an argument, they try and go to Julian to apologize and say, "We're not going to talk about your genetic modification to anybody. We're going to keep it out of any conversation with Zimmerman, any interview, etc." Unfortunately, they make this apology and confession to the holographic version of Julian, who is unfortunately being tested by Zimmerman and O'Brien. So O'Brien and Zimmerman learn the truth. O'Brien tells Julian. Julian is angry and tells his parents, tells O'Brien that I knew this was always possible, that this would come up. So I'm just gonna quietly leave Starfleet, so that there is no big hullabaloo, and just be done with it. But his parents go to Cisco, who contacts Starfleet, and they come to a compromise. Julian's father will go to prison for 2 years for getting the genetic modifications, but because Julian has proven to be a upstanding member of Starfleet, they're going to allow him to stay in Starfleet. The real important thing is they don't want genetically modified humans like a certain one we'll talk about in a little bit, because if you start genetically modifying people, we've have the history of the genetic wars, etc. And so they don't want it, but they'll let this case kind of slide as long as Julian's father goes to prison for 2 years. So Julian reconciles with his parents, and they go back to Earth. Meanwhile, there's a little secondary story going on. Lita, who has broken up with Julian and is interested in getting with Rom, but Rom can't bring himself to ask her out. Zimmerman is interested in her, and so he asks her out, and then eventually asks her to come with him back to, I think it's Jupiter, to his
Jupiter
station. When,
Station. Yes.
yeah, Jupiter Station, so she can run the cafe there and live with him. But right before she gets on the ship to leave, Rom finally runs up and says he loves her. She says she loves him, and so they get together. And Zimmerman very graciously allows her to go be with Rom. So I think I hit up the high points, and I
Yes, you
probably
did.
said way too much, frankly. But
Nah,
anyway,
it's good.
all right,
So there's a lot to unpack in this episode. A lot of history,
yeah.
a lot of crossover stuff, so many different things that are going on here. So again, Mr. First Time Viewer, watching this and knowing what you know a little bit about, like the past stuff and whatever else. What did you think of this episode?
So I was wondering how they were going to make any conflict out of this episode when it started, because it's like, oh, we're making Bashir, we're interviewing Bashir, we're getting his parents on the station. Ooh, he doesn't want his parents on the station. It's true, we've never met them in the 5 years that we've had the show going. Why haven't we met his parents yet? Oh, they're here and he's not enjoying it. And then boom, turns out the whole time Dr. Bashir is a semi, superhuman, just short of a certain genetically modified person himself,
Ah, yes,
Khan.
Todd.
Um,
Yes, yes.
and so the end of the episode, which I forgot to mention, of course, is that turns out Dr. Bashir has been treating O'Brien to the easy mode of
Of his
darts.
abilities, of his abilities. Yeah,
he,
he's been scaling back.
yeah, he's been able to play darts perfectly the whole time. Anytime he's been pulling back, it was just to make sure he and O'Brien were having a good time together, which, of course, just makes you think back to all the episodes that have happened before, all of the the game, like the not
Um,
pickleball, but
no,
the
they were
one
playing spring ball.
that's it, spring ball, like stuff like that. This whole time, it turns out like Bashir was wanting to be a tennis star at one point. It turns out he's been a genetically modified human all along, which is hilarious. We can talk more about it as we go on, but
Yeah.
that that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
So I really like this episode because it's a great callback to greater Trek lore, and of course, with the big name there, Khan. This
Mhm.
goes all the way back to the original series. The episode was called Space Seed, and that's where we were first introduced to Khan Noonien Singh, played by Ricardo Montalban, and his epic maniacal struggle against Captain Kirk.
Uh-huh.
And this is something that they touch on again in actually the newest one of the newer Star Trek shows, Strange New Worlds, and this fear that Earth in particular, but the Federation at large has against genetically modified or augmented individuals. We
Right.
see augments come up in Star Trek Enterprise as well. We see them talk about genetically engineered humans, but not from Earth per se. There's a colony of people who've gone out and they've been separated long enough and they've done their own thing. But there's like several times in Next Generation they also talked about the dangers of genetically modifying individuals. So that seems to be the recurring thread in Trek, is that it's it's definitely frowned upon to the point where it's outright outlawed for the
Right.
Federation.
Hmm.
And all of this stemming from the eugenics wars. These are wars that we have not seen portrayed on screen yet, but it's basically World War III for Earth.
Mm.
And it's because there are these genetically modified humans who think that eventually get to the point where they begin to see themselves as truly superior to the rest of the human race. It causes mass conflicts, obviously on a global scale, hence the World War III term. It
Hmm.
leads to the death of billions and the devastation of the planet, and almost to the point of bringing humanity to the brink of extinction,
Mm.
until finally things kind of just, we don't know why, but the things tend to de-escalate. um, could be because there just wasn't enough people left to really have any kind of constant conflict with.
Right.
This gives rise, of course, to the First Contact movie that we watched, and we see kind of the aftermath of the war of World War III, and Zephram Cochrane being born from that struggle,
Mm.
which leads us into the space age and first contact with Vulcans and so forth and so on as the movie goes. So
Yeah.
we're dealing with kind of the foundational work here of a lot of Trek that moves forward from the 60s on. This is an issue that keeps getting touched on.
Right.
um, Now, there's one bit of dialogue in this episode that I thought was interesting because it relates to one of the newer Star Trek shows, Strange New Worlds, and that's where, after the reveal of Julian's enhanced status, he's in, I'm assuming, his quarters talking to O'Brien,
Hmm.
and O'Brien says to him, there probably hasn't been a case dealing with this in 100 years.
Yep.
So now, if we go back to the new show, I guess, Strange New Worlds, I'm not exactly sure if that's 100 years, if that would make it 100 years. But if it does, then the people on Strange New Worlds have been paying attention and did a great job, because they did a whole episode about genetically engineered individuals serving in Starfleet, and it's called Ad Astra per Aspera. And if you have not watched that episode, even if you don't know anything about Strange New Worlds or Khan, all the rest of them, you should watch that episode. It is a fantastic, fantastic procedural episode, all about dealing with the rule of law. We've got lawyers, we've got the whole court, you know, tribunal thing going on. It's beautifully done. Beautifully done. Every single person in that episode does a great job. But of course, the two main stars of the episode are going to be the person who played the lawyer, and then the character, of course, who was on trial for being an augment, and that
Hmm.
was the first officer
Hmm.
on that show. So you should definitely go watch it. Hey, David, even you should go watch it. You've got Paramount Plus. go to Strange New Worlds. I watched it recently. I think I watched it like maybe a week ago. Um, Ad Astra per Aspera. It's a great episode.
Okay.
Um, go watch it, and it gives us a little bit more detail about Federation law, which we always hear about Federation law, but the one we hear about the most is obviously going to be the Prime Directive. This gives us a little bit more insight into kind of all of the statutes and whatever else that go into um, General Order Number One or the Prime Directive. So if you're interested in any of that at all, it's another reason to go and watch that episode. So absolutely go check that out. So now we're dealing with a genetically enhanced, genetically engineered um, Bashir, and he tells his story of why it happened. He was 6 years old. He was falling behind his other classmates, but not just so much falling behind as it was. He was struggling. I mean, he talks about how while his classmates were reading and writing and practicing on the computer, he was still grasping with understanding the difference between a tree and a house
Mouse and
and
cats and
cats.
dogs.
So I mean, there's clearly to me that speaks of a fundamental developmental breakdown if he
Right.
can't distinguish between a tree and a house.
Right.
So clearly there was something wrong with him here. So gonna ask, how would you feel about genetic engineering, genetic manipulation? I
Oh,
think that
genetic
you're
engineering. Oh
yeah.
man. I've never really given it much thought until. I mean, let me put it this way. The only time I've really thought about it I can think of is like Gattaca, this movie Gattaca,
I
which
remember
is
that
with
movie with
Ethan
Ethan Hawke
Hawke.
and Uma Thurman
Yeah,
and what's the guy's name who played Holmes in the Sherlock? No, he played
Jude Law.
Watson in
Jude
Jude Law.
Law.
Yes,
Yes, yeah. First time I ever saw any of those actors in anything, and it's a great movie.
it's a fantastic
As
movie.
it's
Love that
man,
movie.
just thinking about it all over again, I'm like, yeah, it's like maybe top 10 for me. Actually, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
like, there's so many movies that could fit in top 10, but like just thinking about it, I'm like, oh man, that movie is really good. And of course, for a quick read down plot of that one, the main character, Ethan Hawke's character, is not genetically enhanced, but his younger brother is. And later in life, he takes the DNA. Well, there is an enhanced human, Jude Law's character. He's been crippled because he tried killing himself and he got crippled in the process. And so he now gives his enhanced DNA to Ethan Hawke's character, but not like in his cells. Like they didn't like trade DNA transfusion or anything. He just gives him his dead skin cells and his flakes and his hair so he
Cuts off
can
his
fake it.
legs.
Yeah, he like fakes it so he can like sprinkle all of the like the detritus around his person so that anyone coming along with like a vacuum cleaner and there's a murder. And anyway, the whole point of the movie is like what are the ramifications of genetic engineering. And I mean, I feel like the easy answer is like, oh, genetic engineering is bad. But the movie, I would certainly say, is trying to make a more complex answer to that. Because the people, like Jude Law's character was genetically enhanced and he tried killing himself. Like, it doesn't make you a happier person.
Yeah.
It turns out his brother is one of the detectives that tries going after him, and he's not a happy person. And Uma Thurman's character isn't happy either, but Ethan Hawke makes her happy, and he's not genetically enhanced. So like it's a great movie. I
Well,
won't
I
say
would say
anything more.
well, I would say for all of those, Star Trek included, I think that the um, first message that they seem to be wanting you to latch onto is that yes, genetic engineering, genetic modification is bad. But then
Right.
as you continue to watch the story that they're actually telling, it's more along the lines of um, there's a quality of life that cannot be engineered, and
Yes.
that no matter what we do, no matter how we try to change ourselves, there is a need for this kind of free expression that you
Right.
can't get through genetic engineering. I mean,
Right.
even in this episode, it's talking about how there's an exception to everything.
Right.
Like Julian, like the fear of genetically modified individuals and the eugenics wars being the guiding principle here for Starfleet. We see that Julian is an exception who his issue was that he would have lived a fundamentally, probably just terrible life. I mean, the man couldn't distinguish between a tree and a house. What kind of life did you think he was going to have?
Dogs and cats I can understand, but tree and house, I was like, oh man, he
Yeah,
really was
I
having
mean,
trouble.
he was struggling, and so because of the genetic manipulation, he now is he's a bright shining star who's contributing to society. He's not harmful. He's not, megalomaniacal. He's not, he's not crazy or
He
anything
doesn't
else.
flaunt it. He hasn't been
Yes,
flaunting this. I mean, he
yes.
hasn't flaunted it for the reason that it's illegal. So maybe if it was legal, maybe he would be flaunting it. Who knows? But
Now
keep going. Yeah.
the JAG officer makes a good point at the end. He's talking about, for every Julian Bashir that comes out of the program, there's a Khan Noonien Singh waiting in the wings somewhere.
Right.
That's kind of the thing that they're saying. There's no way to really tell what's going to happen to the individual who gets this kind of treatment. So
Right.
it's better to err on the side of caution and not do it
Right.
than to run the risk.
Right.
But again, there can be exceptions. There may be necessary, things that can be corrected only through this kind of gene therapy thing that they offer. So who knows? I know that as our parallel, of course, humans have only, I guess you could say, fairly recently, considering the grand scheme of time with medical practices and so forth, begun doing gene therapy. We do use it as treatment for just a few diseases. I know there's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of different things that they're trying to expand it to. I think, I know that like cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, and there's some other things that are treated currently by it. You can just
Right.
look those up really quick. I did, and I think there's like a top five that they look at. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do with it that could be both good or bad, but we haven't really gotten there yet,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see it. So for this show to be, kind of breaching that subject yet again here in the 90s, it shows a great amount of consistency with Star Trek because, I mean, they started talking about it in the 60s. They did several episodes about it in the 80s with Next Generation. And now here
Right.
we are with Deep Space Nine following
Yeah.
suit. So really
Yeah.
like that consistency here.
Yeah. And this is a 90s show. Gattaca was a 90s movie and all that. So definitely was on the mind of the times. I guess I would say it's one of those things that, like, if everyone could receive the same level of genetic tampering to, like, like, let's say like Alzheimer's or something, like there's some that's genetic on some level, and so we could eradicate it from the gene pool. Okay, it makes sense. But yeah, it does make sense there would be some consequences to that. If you can genetically modify this, what else could you genetically modify? The movie Gattaca points out that like the movie had his parents like making, they got, some eggs fertilized, and they left them in like test tubes, and there are people who already do that. They get eggs fertilized and they put them in a freezer. And I mean, I'm on the pro life argument of the abortion argument, and part of that argument is like, hey, treating people like commodities is an issue. Like, even doing that is an issue if you just leave, a fully DNA unique person, even if they're only just a, cell, left in, some freezer somewhere. Where's the slippery slope going to lead at some point? Are we going to allow that to continue on in some capacity? Does that argumentation move forward? And so
Mhm.
Gattaca kind of brings that up a bit. This show didn't, this episode didn't, but it's one of those things where, like, if everyone could receive the same benefit,
Mhm.
then, if you could rise all boats, rise all boats. But if you can't, man, it can cause some issues. And if it makes sense that there was a war, there was some I'm better than you people. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe there were some people who were scared of the genetically modified people and were like, we can't
So
have that.
So I think this episode gets a couple of things a little confused because if you look it up, I was just doing a little bit of research here in prep for our episode, of course, and the phrase they keep using is genetic engineering, but it sounds more like what Bashir got was actually closer to gene therapy, not
Yes.
genetic engineering, because
Yes.
genetic
Yes.
engineering talks about fundamentally changing the DNA, typically of like an embryo, something that has
Right.
before it gets to a point of any actual real development. So before they're born, that
Right.
we are making these edits to the very DNA that makes us an individual, enhancing some things, cutting out some other things in order to get this kind of superhuman status. That is what we are dealing with when we look at the story of Khan.
Hmm.
Khan and his acolytes were all genetically engineered. So upon their birth, they were genetically perfect. They spent countless times in test tubes and cross this and that and whatever else to come up with their DNA
Right.
before and then implanting that DNA into an embryo to let it grow and develop.
Right.
Julian, on the other hand, had a normal birthing cycle, gestation.
Yeah.
They didn't realize something was wrong with him until, again, he said he was 6 years old. So then that's where it would be gene therapy, because they took this individual who was struggling. They identified precisely the areas where he was struggling, where his development was lacking, and they
Right.
then enhanced those areas to make
Right.
him like others. Unfortunately, it went beyond just making him normal, and it was a greater enhancement so that it improved all these other things for him. And
That's a
it's
great
more,
point. Keep talking, but yeah,
yeah.
that's a great point. Yeah.
And so that was more out of the whole, where he's a kid. We're not really sure 100% what issues he's going to have. We see these defects, so we can correct these defects. Let's
Right.
do that. And it had the added bonus of enhancing him entirely. So
Right.
that would be gene therapy, not genetic engineering. There is a
Right.
difference there, but they do keep saying that in the episode. So
Right.
I
Yeah, it's
think
a
that's
good.
why I mean, I think there's a good distinction there.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, they designer babies isn't what happened here, like in Gattaca. Gattaca, it's from literally the cell, the egg. Designer babies, and I again, one of the points that Gattaca is making is that people who are genetically engineered are kind of designed to fit in a certain slot in society, and that is actually oppressive to those people because it forces them to be here. You are designed to be here in society, and you can't deviate. Whereas natural birth, you're allowed to go wherever you want, but in that society, it's also oppressive because they won't let you ascend. But in this instance, yeah, it wasn't. I like what you said. It wasn't trying to get Bashir or Julian, as he likes to insist being called, to just catch up. It takes him from catch up to leading the pack, and that's why they had to get
Mhm.
him in a different school. Um, and it really just it brings up an interesting question: is that an unfair advantage to another kid because they didn't get genetically enhanced? If Julian was doing a good job now, and he takes advantage of the opportunities that come his way because he now has that capacity to handle those opportunities. I mean, it's a fascinating question because on some level it's like, well, Julian's not responsible for what happened to him, and again, he didn't go to jail. It's his father who goes to jail at the end of the episode. But was there someone else who unfairly lost opportunities because this happened? Because it's a hard argument to make. If Bashir was better qualified after the fact, that still means he was a better
So
qualified candidate. So that's a
So
great
that's one
question.
of the things, and that's one of the things about the utopia world of Starfleet and Star Trek here that makes certain arguments like these a bit harder to understand, because the way that everything seems to work in this particular society is that everyone can have a job. Everyone can have a purpose. You can find other ways to lead a purposeful life, and that whole idea of necessarily missing out on opportunities that would bring you, money, for example, doesn't exist for them because there is no money in the 24th century. That's not a concern. That's part of that world building that we have not seen. Like, how did they get to that point of everybody being able to have nice things, right?
Right,
And you have to assume that at some point in that kind of evolution, it's not so much about everybody having nice things so much as it's also about people realizing they don't need to have overly elaborate things in order to survive and be
right,
comfortable. There's no need for two people to live in a 40-room mansion all by themselves. You can be just as happy in a, you know, two-bedroom house or whatever, right? Like that's where there's another part of the disconnect in the lore that we're not seeing.
right,
There are still people who have, family homes, ancestral homes. Picard, his family still maintains control over a vineyard, massive property in France. They've had, for generations, and no one bats an eye about it.
right.
Um, Jake Sisko, we saw the future Jake Sisko is living in that giant old school Louisiana mansion. You know, why is he living? Why does that house even still exist in the 24th century? There's
Right.
obviously reasons, but they haven't explained any of those. We
Right.
see in Star Trek Picard, one of the main characters is living in a nice, but albeit, I mean, it's there's no other term for it I can think of. It's a trailer basically, out in the middle of the desert. It's very nice. It's all trekked up as the best way I could think about it. She got a lot of technology and things like that. It looks very nice, but I mean, compared to the elaborate sprawling mansion of Jean-Luc Picard, her
Mhm.
place is kind of, a hole. So it's just like, how did they get to that point? People being like, this isn't necessary for me. We don't need to do all this. Because that's where the whole redistribution of wealth
Right.
um brings about that kind of utopian society. So there had to be, millionaires, billionaires, and zillionaires, or whatever they are, giving up property, land, titles, giving up all of those things in order to make this work. Now, it could just be that they were the first people who were targeted in World War III, and once you wipe them out, no one really cares anymore. So that's why there was suddenly all these things available. But
Right.
yeah, there's a lot that we don't know about that. But those are other questions I think about too. But when it comes to missing out on opportunities, I mean, that's a great point. I don't know. I guess it's not something that we would have to really worry about here, but in our world, we would certainly worry about that.
Hmm.
Children missing out on opportunities because someone was genetically enhanced.
Right.
So I guess my next question for you would be: would it be okay if we only did gene therapy versus genetic engineering?
Um, I think, as someone who has not explored the issue for very long, I do think that on some level it's okay. I mean, certainly because you said you can pull up examples of it already happening now. I would
And
imagine that.
just to be clear, gene therapy is the one that's used to specifically target disease. They're
Right.
looking at ways to cure disease
Well, I
versus
guess.
genetic engineering, which is taking away or modifying your base pair sequences here.
Right. Well, I guess what it really comes down to is what you said earlier, which really brings the point home. Dr. Bashir, as a child, he wasn't just brought up into line with all the other kids. He wasn't down here and then brought up into the pack. He was caused to excel. So, like
So
this, that makes sense. But doing this, that's the question.
so my question on that, because they don't really explain it, and so I guess my final question on that to the writers and so forth would be, was that the intention? Because they make it sound like all they were really trying to do was bring him up to spec, basically, with the rest of the kids.
Right.
But it's one of those things that they can't 100% control.
Right.
You can't stop the progress once it's kind of begun.
Right.
So they did enhance him because they felt he needed to be enhanced, but then it just naturally through the course of him living, the
Hmm.
things kind of also improved and got even better. So
Right.
like they were like, oh, his motor skills are absolutely terrible, we're
Right.
going to enhance those to make him like everyone else. But then you by speeding him up with that, you gave him an advantage of him being way more coordinated at 7 than a
Right.
typical 7-year-old would be. And then
Right.
now he's 7 with the coordination of, say, a 15-year-old,
Right.
and then he's 15 and he's had all those years of practicing and training, and we all get better with skills as we get older.
Right.
So that's what I think that's what happened there. It wasn't that they intentionally jumped him ahead of everyone else. They brought him up so quickly that now his
Well, I
the
would put
time
it
to develop it got also cut short.
Well, I would just put it like it's one of those things where once you unlock the key, you can't relock it again. Maybe that's
Yeah,
how it works. Like, there's
yeah.
no way to just again using the whole. You can't just get them here. Once you
And then
start
just
going, you go all the way.
yeah,
Um,
they can't just go back in there and dial it down. It's like, oh, we're gonna turn you up to 11 for about 6 months, and then we're gonna dial you back down. I was like, nah, we broke it.
yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. So again, it's one of those things where, like, of course, everyone. I mean, if someone could come along and give me some sort of quick fix to like I'm genetically enhanced as an adult, even I don't know why I wouldn't want to take it or anyone else wouldn't want to. Um, the question again becomes, what does it allow you to achieve? Because and like who has access to it? I mean, that's a question that it's a fascinating one to explore. I've never really thought about it much. I mean, again, I've seen Gattaca,
Okay.
but I haven't seen the movie in ages, and I haven't thought about the implications much since. So
So
this is a
next question.
fascinating idea.
Next question. All right. So gene flash forward. Gene therapy is commonplace. It's everywhere. You can go to Walgreens to get yourself a shot and do whatever. What would you have? What do you feel like is your thing that you would want to have modified? What do you feel like is a problem that you would love to just be able to do that and get fixed?
um, I've never been a particularly athletic person. I haven't really been interested in being athletic necessarily either. It's just like been. I mean, I was a kid who was, small. I mean, I was like, I was born in June, so I was always the youngest of the class I was in. So I was never in a position to really excel according to my other classmates. Part of me wonders, like, if I had been kept back a couple months, kept back a year, how would my life be different? But anyway, never been all that interested in athletical activities. But if I could have a shot and I could dunk on a basketball court or run a mile without having to sweat or something, um, that's where I'd start. Intellectual pursuits, of course, would be lovely as well. But I would start on the physical. How about you?
Um, I think for me, I always worry about my joints. I'm an extremely tall individual, and I've been told for years that because of that, and also because I did play sports and everything else, those are going to be my problem areas as I age. So if I could do something that would really just fix that without the need of any kind of like super hardcore invasive surgery, no replacements, none of that, I would definitely do that.
Right.
Um, and that's being very mundane. If we're gonna go like just if we're gonna totally sci-fi it up, right? I want my vision enhanced. I want to be able to have,
Ooh,
I already have pretty good vision. But I want that freaking, next
2020, maybe.
level. No, I already have 2020. I want that next level laser sight, I can
Eagle, like an eagle seeing
all
a
of it.
seeing
Yeah, man.
prey
I
from
just I
miles
want
away,
you.
kind of thing.
That's right. I want to be able to watch a movie with like I'm sitting next to the screen, but it's like 5 miles away or whatever that amazing magic genetic number is that it does.
Right,
Or I want to have my immune system super enhanced so that I never get sick, no matter what
right,
it is. No disease is going to take me out. That I'm just
right.
I'm impervious. Oh, that's what I would want.
You know what's really interesting? The thing that I always when genetic engineering has popped in the back of my head, I haven't ever really thought about it much in detail, but one thing that has come to mind is, eventually we all die. Eventually our bodies give out. So how well would these improvements last, like for how long? Because I think sci-fi usually answers the question of like it's a short burst of flame. Like you're brilliant, you're successful, your body works great, but then it burns out quickly and you die at an early age. I think that's typically how sci-fi answers these questions.
but
I don't
only
know though. What do you think?
because but only because those individuals who go that route tend to become very selfish,
Right,
you know because there's always like the cautionary tale of somebody else who's lived an extraordinary life and an extraordinarily long life. Not necessarily that they're immortal, but that they have had a longer life obviously than even the most long-lived human.
right,
um, and the main takeaway from every single one of those characters when they pop up is they've lived simply, they've lived humbly, they've traveled, they've seen things, they've experienced a lot of things, they have a lot of stories, a lot of miles they've traveled and so forth, but they are so content with the fact that they have just done that without having to amass great fortunes or being dictators or any of those things, that they have this true salt of the earth persona about them from having lived and extensively traveled for so long. um, I think that longevity is always going to be one of those things that pops up for humans because we are, especially as we age, we become acutely aware of the fact that we have more, time behind than ahead.
right.
And yeah, anything we can do to stave that off is it just becomes more and more paramount. I was hearing recently there's some guy who is a millionaire, billionaire, whatever, who has invested millions of dollars into de-aging himself. And he was
I
even to
think
the
I heard
point where
about
he
this
was
guy.
getting,
Yeah.
yeah, even at one point he was getting blood transfusions from his younger son in order to use his young blood to rejuvenate his cells, whatever else. And they said that, uh, yeah, scientifically, technically, he has de-aged himself by like 2 years. So all that money, all that expense, the intense regimen of supplements and injections and all these things that he's got to do in order to maintain this. And it's like, okay, great. On the one hand, you've extended your life 2 years, but on the other hand, what quality of life are you having?
Right.
You're not eating anything. You're taking all of your nutrition in via injections and pill form supplements. You
Right.
don't go outside because you don't want to have too much sun exposure. You like all these things, so you don't enjoy any of the things that make life worth living.
Right.
I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want to be stuck into a box and okay, you're gonna live for 300 years, but you step 1 foot outside of this room and you're gonna fall apart and turn into a
Right.
pile of dust. Not worth it. Not worth
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would want to have a very long life, but I would want my life to be productive, and I want
Right.
to see things and experience things and see my friends and family and so forth. I wouldn't want it any other way. So
Yeah. The one thing about aging, if I remember my biology class at all, it was the telomeres on the ends of
the
your
infamous
chromosomes.
telomeres,
Yeah,
yes.
those little bits on the end of your chromosomes are basically just there to like buffer whenever your genes are copied and your cells divide. It's there to act as a buffer in case any little bits get left behind and not everything is copied appropriately. And so for me, it's like we got to solve that problem first. Like
I
telomeres
mean,
can't be
I'm
left
pretty sure
behind.
that's the main problem. It's like once they start to wear out, that's it. That's when you're on the decline, and
Of
then
course, the one thing that I
yeah,
always think about whenever I think about that. Well, if every cell, human cell is divided, that means that, your kids are your genes you're passing along, or their telomeres also slowly like
yeah, they are.
in a
But that's
thousand, 100,000 years from now, are humans just gonna age in a day?
well, no, that's like well, that's what they say. It's just like that's how they track your age because you have these you have a certain number when you're born, and
Right,
then over time they just decline, and then
right,
barring anything unnatural, when they are all gone, that's when your number's up. You know,
right,
so if they can figure out a way to slow down that process of us losing them, that would be that secret to longer life, but we haven't
right,
really gotten there yet. So,
right.
but that's interesting though that for a lot of Star Trek, that doesn't ever really seem to be the focus of many of the characters that we come across. The long life, they seem to be very content with doing the most with the time that they have. You find a couple of characters who pop up every so often who are very obsessed with living forever and augmenting themselves to do so, but they almost always turn out to be villains.
Yeah,
you know Never are any of our good guys like, oh man, I need to get like all of my internals replaced so that I can be here for the next 200 years or whatever.
right.
Even the Vulcans go crazy after they've reached 200.
Yeah.
So
Well, when Picard was
interesting.
80, right? He's like 80 or so when Enterprise or when TNG is supposed to be going on or something, right?
No, when next gen started, I believe he was 59.
Okay.
I think he
Because
was, yeah.
Patrick Stewart was like 40-ish, but his character was
Pat,
closer to
yeah, that's
70.
right. Patrick Stewart was yeah, like 45 or 46, playing a 59-year-old man.
Right.
And then that was, from what I understand, that was done on purpose because it was supposed to be that in the 24th century, your 50s are like your 40s or whatever it is.
Right.
So they did that on purpose.
Right.
Um, yeah, because then in Picard, he's not quite 100. I think he just celebrates his 99th birthday in the show. So
Right.
yeah, and then of course he goes and does weird things and gets a new synth body, and yeah, just go. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I'll get
Um,
to it eventually. I'll get to it
yeah.
eventually.
So now let's turn our attention to Dr. Zimmerman. Here,
Ah,
almost towards the end of our show, we
yep.
finally get to Lewis Zimmerman
Yep.
here. Dr. Lewis Zimmerman, who works at Jupiter Station. He is a famed holographic programmer. He did create the emergency medical holographic program, which becomes famous on Star Trek Voyager when it is activated for the first time to take the place of the chief medical officer who dies in the pilot episode. And now we see him here on the station doing, well, the next generation of his work. Instead of the emergency medical hologram, he's looking for the long term medical hologram, and they're going to base it off of Dr. Bashir. Um, what did you think of Dr. Zimmerman?
He's a fun character for sure because he's got. I mean, he's full of snark. It's just he's chock full of it. Um, I guess we'll just have to put up with your luminous personality or it's just comments like that throughout. I'm trying to think of some great zingers he had, but of course it's hard for me to remember all the good ones. But he was fun. I mean, I don't imagine he'll be back anytime soon or not.
He doesn't show up anymore on Deep Space Nine, but obviously the EMH is running on Voyager, which is was running at the same time this show was,
Right,
and Lewis Zimmerman does pop up as Lewis Zimmerman on Voyager as well, a holographic version of Lewis Zimmerman, and then
right,
later on Zimmerman himself, an older version towards the
right.
end of the show.
Gotcha.
Um, so, in talking about the emergency medical hologram, that is a program, like you said, it's supposed to service as a doctor temporarily
Right,
until a new one can be, put in place. But on Voyager, they're stranded 70 years from the nearest outpost, so the EMH becomes the doctor. In
right,
fact, that's his name, Doctor. They don't ever name him; he's just the doctor. So.
right.
Um,
Doctor Who.
Right, right. I always thought that was a good wink and a nod towards Doctor Who, that he's just always referred to as the Doctor,
Right.
but they never acknowledge it,
Have you ever
unfortunately.
watched the YouTube channel Epic Rap Battles of History by chance?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
I have.
because this makes me think maybe they did one of those because that would be perfect.
I don't know if they've done a
Those
Doctor
together.
Who one. I think my
I,
favorite one is when they do Bill Nye and Sir Isaac Newton. It's
yeah,
probably my
well, they're all
favorite one.
great,
Yeah.
but they're all hilarious. But yeah,
Well, Dr. Zimmerman is an irascible man to say the least. This is a
mm,
character trait
good
that
word.
is definitely um, passed on to the EMH.
Mm.
And I loved when they had that moment where they took the EMH's protocols and transferred them into the Julian
Yes, I
EMH.
like that too.
Wasn't
That was
fully
a
formed yet.
great scene.
Yeah. So now Julian's acting like him. That was
Right.
great. I was
Yeah.
like, how do you feel when someone's parroting you to your
Right.
face?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a great little moment because you initially don't get it. You just this is a hologram, but then as soon as you know that it's the personality profile in Dr. Bashir's hologram, it's so funny. I mean, I wish we could have extended that scene.
Mhm.
Like, what is Dr. Bashir but not? His
Yeah.
personality is not the same. Um, yeah, that would have been hilarious if we could have had more of that.
So this is kind of the beginning also of Starfleet experimenting with holographic personnel. This idea only comes up in Voyager, but Voyager does it a couple of times when they come across ships that have nothing but holographic crews on them,
Ooh,
when they encounter a race of people who are deadly fearful of holograms and decide that anyone who's running a holographic program, it must be destroyed.
oh,
There's another race that hijacks Voyager because of the holographic programs that they have, and basically wants to use that to augment their own technology for the purpose of hunting. And then there's we actually see a version of the LMH, but it's not played by Bashir in Voyager,
cool.
when the Doctor ends up making contact with Earth and is put on an experimental vessel called the Prometheus, and he runs into his new counterpart there on that ship. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you feel, I don't know if you're fans, whatever. But that Doctor was played by Andy Dick, and their
Okay.
interaction is unusual to say the least. So, um, That's all I'm going to say about that. But basically, Star Trek, they use holograms a lot, and then in Discovery, when they flash forward to the future, we see that holograms are kind of everywhere, and they're doing a lot of things.
Mm,
This whole idea of holographic people, and kind of keeping holograms at a certain level of development so that they don't become autonomous the way the Doctor eventually does on Voyager. Um, I mean, he does. He absolutely does.
I'm sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and then of course, Picard also deals with this whole synthetic people thing too. I mean, we were getting already touches of that with
Moriarty.
Data, but then yeah, we have Moriarty, who there's a lot of this recurring theme here. So I always wonder, like, should we be doing this? Like, when if we want to say, if we want to dive into the universe, and we're seeing that these programs are able to over time achieve sentience, should we continue to create these programs? Don't we have a responsibility to not just on a whim bring our fantasies to life and then
I
we're just
know.
shutting them off? Like, where does the distinction lie? Because, like I said, the Doctor on Voyager eventually achieves sentient status.
Yeah.
But that seems to be through the fact that he's running continuously. They allow his program to expand. He develops all kinds of interactions and attachments to the crew, and whatever else, and eventually you can't distinguish him from another crew member.
Right.
Um, so if that can happen, and we already knew of the potential of that happening with Moriarty, who also achieved sentience on the Enterprise, should we really be making these holographic people?
It's a great question, man. the real,
I
here's backing up on all of this we've been talking about genetic manipulation. The thing that really stands out to me is like, at what point does scientific advancement just go beyond it just advances forward, it marches forward, like you can't stop it? Is that really what it comes down to? Is that, on some level maybe we can't stop the future from happening? It's not a question of whether it's moral or not or ethical or not. It's here. Now we got to deal with it. I don't
so
know.
that always reminds me of a quote from two of them now that I think about it. One from Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, which is the final movie that the original series did, and it's where the president stands up and he's given a speech, and the line that he says is, "Just because we can do a thing, it does not necessarily follow that we
We
must
should.
do that
Oh
thing."
my.
And then, of course, there is the infamous Jurassic Park line about how life finds a way,
Finds a way.
So, it's just like, if you give, no matter how you look at it, if you're giving the building blocks for something, then life will kind of find a way. It will make itself happen.
Right.
And then to the other statement there, it's, just because you can, does it follow that you should? Like, yes, we
Right.
can create these holograms, but should we? Have we really sat and thought about all of the ramifications behind creating them? Um, let's take
It's
Reginald Barkley really quick.
yeah.
I just want to say, let's take
Oh
Reginald
yeah, yeah,
Barkley,
yeah, for
who,
sure. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
well, he loved creating holographic versions of people who already existed. What if one of those were to suddenly be like,
Dr.
no,
Moriarty and
right?
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, what if, well, not even that, but what if the one that he created of Deanna was to be like, no, I'm Deanna Troy. You're the imposter. I'm going to walk off the holo. What do
Oh.
what do we do in that situation?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean
That's
that's basically what the Moriarty guy is
yeah,
saying. He takes over the whole ship for an episode because he's like, I'm done waiting for you guys to figure it out. I'm gonna force your
right.
hand, and they pull the greatest of cons on him. They put him in a
Yeah.
box and say, "Okay, you're
Yeah, the
free."
old switcheroo. You're free for as long as this has power.
Yeah, exactly.
Have
Oh
fun.
man. Uh, but
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
it's of course, I was gonna say is the episode in season 2 of TNG where Data is put on trial for sentience. I mean, that's the whole point of that episode, and the whole point of the show was to answer that question: what does it mean to be sentient? And it never gives a clear answer. I don't think there is a
Measure
way
of a
to really,
man. Great
yeah.
episode.
There's no way to 100% give a clear answer on that stuff. I mean, I'll say this right now, just briefly. I don't think the human soul is something that can be reproduced, can be faked. So I don't believe that artificial intelligence will ever truly be an artificial intelligence, as in like a human being. It might be able to impersonate it on some level, but it won't
So
have a morality. There
would you
won't. There will
s-
never be a morality core of its own.
so would
Um,
you say that there's a distinction between artificial intelligence and then artificial sentience? Could we separate those 2 out then? Because
yes.
I
Yeah.
think we can. I do think we can have artificial intelligence, but br
Right.
that gap between intelligence to sentience is where, where the debate really is, and I feel like I don't think we'll ever really get there. I think that those 2 things will always be separate
Yeah.
because the most
It
powerful
even
computer in the world can mimic a lot of things, but it's still not
right.
sentient.
Yeah, I think it's the classic problem of if you cut a line in half again and again and again and again and again, you'll always have something to cut in half and you'll never quite get to the end. But you might still cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut the line in half and it gets closer and closer and closer, but it doesn't quite get there.
That's
That's my feeling.
there's a math principle, the asymptote, that follows that same principle
I forget
of
what it's called, but yeah,
it's always approaching zero, but no
right.
matter what you do, it'll never get there.
It's
It'll
never quite
always approach
there.
it right.
Yeah.
No matter how far you follow it, no matter what you do, it will be extremely close, but it will never actually hit
And the closer
zero.
you zoom in on it,
So
the more real you realize it's not there yet. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
my feeling. I mean, of course, the biggest question with artificial intelligence is at what point does it can you be confused and can you be duped into believing that you are experiencing something that is
There's a
a
term
real
for that too. It's something
Turing
about
test?
yeah, but there's another one. It's about something that like that approaches near human something and it's staring back at us. I forget what it's called, but there's this. It's just it's there. It talks about there being a fundamental disconnect in that when we view it, it's something that causes like the animal part of our hindbrains or whatever to freak out whenever we see it. I forget what that's called, but I've read about it a couple of times, and I wish I could remember what that is. But yeah, it's something about just approaching something that is almost sentient and how it spooks humans.
Mm,
So that's why certain animals and stuff like that we don't really mess with too much because if we when we approach that line with them, it throws us off. So
right.
I forget what that's called, but the Turing test is another great example of a
Well, the
thought
uncanny
experiment.
valley is that what you're thinking of? The
Maybe
uncanny.
that's what it is, the
Yeah.
uncanny valley.
Well, that's certainly when you look at a face, like an artificially created face, like in computer games, and you can tell it's not real. But yeah, it makes you feel like there's something wrong there. It's not.
Yeah,
You can
there's
tell it's
something. Yeah, something's not quite right here.
yeah.
Um,
A lot of so in the last year, my dad has really enjoyed like Chat GPT and stuff like that,
uh,
and those there are artificial like paintings and artwork you can find. But whenever I've looked at it, in my experience, you can tell what's fake. It might look good, but there's like hands. Apparently, they figured out hands, but apparently, at least to start with, hands were always really weird, like multiple fingers, fingers in the wrong place, pointing the wrong direction. Um, did you ever see the ones where it was like if it was artificial intelligence drawings of people eating? Did you ever see anything like that? Like Will
I saw
Smith
one.
eating spaghetti, and it's so creepy looking.
I saw one where it was like a beer commercial, and it creeped me out. Like,
Yeah,
I was watching it, and it started off, and it seemed normal, like it was like moving through a party or something. But the more you watched it, the more everything in it was just wrong, and
right.
it got to the point where I was like, "What is this?" I remember asking myself, like, is this really a commercial? Like, what am I watching here?" And then
Right.
it was, yeah, the first ever commercial done by ChatGPT or whatever, and I was
Completely
like,
right.
throw that away because it was awful. Like,
Demonic.
yeah, they were picking up bottles and glasses, and hands were morphing into the thing, and
Yes.
they were pouring their hands down their throat, and
Yes.
just and then like extra long mouths or whatever. I was like, no,
Yeah.
who's
Yep.
Salvador Dali nightmare fuel to put this together? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't talked about Lita and Rob. Should we talk about
I
them real
guess we
quick?
I guess we should. The worst couple matchup in the history of couple matchups. I
Worst
don't care what
one, huh?
anybody said. Yes, I don't like it. And look, Lita can do better. Lita can do better.
I
All
mean,
right.
she literally had Dr. Zimmerman at her beck and call, so literally, yes, she can.
I just
Can't
yeah,
believe we're hating
Lita
on
Lita
Rom
can.
like that, though. Come on now.
Look, I've already established I don't like him. I'm not backing down from that. No one is going to convince me that he's just good old lovable Rom. Rom's an idiot, all right, and I don't like him, and that way he talks
Uh,
bothers me.
okay, if you say so.
Uh, yeah, bye, and then takes off running like a little weasel out of the room. I can't stand it. I don't know who decided that that was like a good thing to keep around. I mean, I understand that he was supposed to be kind of the oafish version of, Quark,
Pork.
but man, did he oversell here. I will give the actor credit. He did a great job on portraying that
Yeah,
character. Don't get me wrong, but I don't like him. So,
right. Well, we should at least mention that we learned the origins of Nog in this
yes,
episode.
we do.
We
Yes, we
learned,
do.
and it's a brief story. Quark is giving Nog a hard time about, falling
Giving
in love with
Rom a hard
Lita.
time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. For falling in love with Lita by saying the last time you fell in love with the woman was the woman who had Nog. I guess where they were married. It was a 5-year
Yeah,
contract.
Nog's mother, her name was Prinadora,
Right.
and she's entered into a contract with Rom. They had a kid, Nog, and then he fell in love with her. So then he tried to extend the contract to stay married to her, to which her father used to swindle him out of his entire life savings. She divorced him, took the money, is now married to someone else much richer, and
Right.
he was left with Nog. And that's why they came to live and work on the station with Quark. He
Right.
lost all of his money and had to depend on his brother.
Right. Which is quintessential Ferengi societal behavior, and I love it. Yes,
You know what
marriages
it
are
reminds me of?
what
Did you ever watch Two and a Half Men with Charlie Sheen and what was that other guy's name?
I
John Cryer.
forget.
John Cryer.
I saw.
It's
Come
it's John,
on, it was man, it was so crass, man.
but
I had a hard
that's
time ever watching it,
but
but
that's
yes,
kind of the whole premise. Charlie Sheen is this very successful whatever he is,
he was a
and
jingle. He made jingles for
okay,
commercials. Remember correctly? That's why he could live that lavish lifestyle, but also
yeah.
like do nothing with himself because he
But
just made
then
jingles for commercials.
But then John Cryer, he comes to live with him because he got a divorce and she took all of his stuff, all the money, the house, all of it. And on top of that, he was still having to pay her an exorbitant alimony. So he had no choice but to come and live with his brother. And then even when the son eventually comes to live with them, he is still paying through the nose
Right.
to his ex.
Right.
So yeah, that's when I heard the story, I was like, yeah, it's Two and a Half Men, but with Ferengi. So
It's funny because there's a series of books which I haven't finished. It's by Orson Scott Card, who wrote Ender's Game, and part of the plot of the books, they're set in like a far distant future. Earth has been forgotten, kind of
if
storyline. But
only.
the the society has marriage arrangements like that. They're contracts that they can expire, and women can enter into new contracts with new husbands, if you will. And so the main character, he's like 15 or whatever, has like a half brother, and his dad has had children by different women because he's been like married to different women. So it's very much like what that Ferengi culture just described. And part of the reason I'm bringing that up is because the other series that I started reading the first book of the Red Rising series a few months ago. I'm about to finally get back into the second one, which my roommate is very excited for because he likes them a lot. And they use genetic engineering in that series as well. That society is highly stratified, with tiered societies. If you're a gold, you're at the top. You're in the leadership luxury level, and the reds are the slave laborers. So yeah, it's a pretty common
Mm.
sci-fi trope, but I don't. It's a fascinating one to explore. So
Well, I think we have pretty much covered everything here. And any final thoughts on on this episode? and genetic engineering.
I don't know how they're ever going to play darts again.
Well, clearly Julian has to stand behind the bar, and then he'll be able to play.
I would be so mad. I tell you what, O'Brien was mild compared to how mad I would have been. You've been faking it for how long? I mean,
I've been like, I'm glad to know that you were faking it. Now go stand over there. I would have done just the same thing. I don't care what you say about your faking it. I won those. That's on you for not playing at your best. That's your fault, not mine. That's how I would assuage my conscience right there. Just
there you go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
Well, yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us. We went a little bit longer tonight, but that's okay. I did want to give a brief update. Star Trek, all new episodes of both Strange New Worlds and Discovery will be returning in April. So be on the lookout for both of those. Yes, it will be the final season of Discovery, whereas this will be the third season of Strange New Worlds. They are talking about some cameos in regards to the last season. Not sure who's going to be in that last season for Discovery, but I have a couple of ideas as to who I would want to see. So we'll talk about that next time. They have also moved ahead on the Star Trek Section 31 movie. The cast has been announced, being headlined, of course, by Michelle Yeoh. A bunch of other people that they listed as the cast. I didn't recognize any of them. Which I find disappointing because I had hoped that some people from like Strange New Worlds or Discovery, somebody would be, in the show or in the movie
mhm.
as well. So there is that. Other than that, you can continue to find Trek on Paramount Plus, of course, to watch all the episodes and get caught up and enjoy our show with us. You can listen to our episodes anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. As I said earlier, I do it on Spotify. So, guys, until next week, actually the week after this, because next week you will get our um, first contact app. You should have that by then, and then we'll be doing our other stuff afterwards. And of course, the Expanse. Just until next time, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.